Welcome to Walnut Creek CERT and this presentation of the CERT Basic Training Communications Unit. This unit was created specifically for Contra Costa County, and it has been customized a bit for Walnut Creek CERT. It is communications at the time of this recording, which was March the 14th of 2023, was not a formal unit within the FEMA CERT Basic curriculum. So we created this unit as a supplemental version, since communications, both the tools as well as the manner, are critical to everything we do at CERT. So we join this unit, and it begins, as all units do, with a message about safety, that CERT safety is our #1 priority, that we never operate alone, we always operate in teams, that we never self-activate, we wait for whatever our jurisdiction's protocols are for activation, and that with regard to communications, everything that we do has to be communicated, or essentially it didn't happen. And in Walnut Creek CERT, during a disaster, ham radio is the mode of communication most frequently used. So it's important for anybody operating a radio to be cognizant of where they're standing. Make sure you're not standing in a street, in a roadway, in a dangerous situation. So we add that as an additional safety element. What we'd like you to know about the presentation that follows is that there's going to be a lot of discussion about how to communicate, and the focus is going to be about how to communicate on a ham radio, because that is our primary method of communication. But we want you to understand that the how of how you communicate, the way that you compose your message, the way that you communicate it in a brief, clear way, is the most important discussion in the presentation, because it really doesn't matter if you don't have the technology at the time of a disaster. It doesn't matter what the mode is. You might just simply be communicating directly in person to your CERT command post. You might have to send a runner to another location to verbally communicate it. You might hand the information over on a piece of paper, or it could come across with technology and a ham radio. Doesn't really matter. We want you to take away from this the basics of how to communicate in a manner that is the most effective, that takes the smallest amount of time, and that is mode neutral. So let's join that presentation in progress now.
Margaret, I gotta tell you that that little breakout session was very tricky that you slipped that in there, because the first thing that came to my mind, I didn't participate. I just sat in the background and let the rest of the students do their thing. But the first thing that popped into my mind is, okay, so here you are, you're out in the field, you've either gone out as a team or you've met there or whatever, and you're sitting on all this information. What do you do with it? And that was a great lead in to what we're going to be talking about next, and that is emergency communications. Why communications are important? Well, I think that's pretty obvious, because without the ability to communicate, if you spot something out in the field, if you can't get that information back to the proper departments or authorities, what good is it? Okay, and how you're going to communicate that information is something that's very important. When we do pass messages, where does that message go and how is it handled? Okay, and why two-way radios? Well, I just mentioned that a moment ago. In a major disaster, we're not going to have the ability to use telephones. The primary purpose of CERT communications is to let the proper first responders know what is going on so that they can deploy. Yeah, communications is one of the greatest logistical problems that any of us have during an emergency event. It's very, very critical that we do it. Communications promotes safety, obviously. Reporting safety related incidents or concerns, search and rescue, intra-team communications, status reports, etc. Now, during the breakout, one person in my group mentioned FRS radios, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that and how it compares to ham radios. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about why you should consider getting a ham license. It's, in the old days, I've had a ham license for, I guess, close to 40 years now, and way back in the day, it wasn't that easy to get a ham license. You had to learn Morse code. You had to pass all these tests and everything just to be able to press the mic button and get on the air. And now it's a lot easier. So no more Morse code. You can forget about that. Very simple tests. And we even give the classes right here in CERT. So you can actually qualify in one day. What types of things should you be reporting from the field to the command post? Okay, obviously, something like you see in this picture here, where you have an overturned tanker leaking very dangerous gas. And think back a few days, a couple of weeks to that railroad derailment back east. I mean, that's something obviously that needs to be reported, not 5 hours from now, but right now. Now, that type of information should go to the proper authorities, but who makes the decision and who actually contacts the city or the county with that information? In CERT, we have a communication structure where we have messages that come in from the field team, that's the SRs, the SAR teams, and from there they come into the command post, and from the command post it'll go to the city, and from the city it goes to the county. Does every message end up going directly to the county EOC? Not necessarily, and only the very critical messages are passed through immediately. But who makes the decision as to what messages should be forwarded from the field, and then from the field after it hits the command post? At the command post, there's an incident commander who filters all the messages and makes the decision as to which ones are urgent enough to pass on to the city. And then somebody at the city will make a decision as to which ones should be immediately passed on to the county. This keeps things moving, because if you can imagine, if we had 200 messages come in and they all got forwarded to the county, somebody at the county then would have to sit there and sort through them. And that's just total waste of time. So what we do is, as we sort messages, we use kind of a triage system, and we break the messages down into different categories. The real emergency ones, messages that can wait a little bit, and then finally the non-critical ones, just basic information. And that's how they're eventually passed through our system. As I mentioned, in the field, individual CERT members are grouped up, and we have emergency messages, we have priority, or we have basic routine messages. All these messages go from the field to the incident commander, the individual neighborhood command post. And there they're sorted, and a decision is made as to which ones then get passed on immediately to the city. So if you look at this chart, you can see on the left-hand column different types of things that you may run into in the field. And just imagine now, a landslide, for example. Is that something that's absolutely critical? It could be, maybe, or it could not be. Depends if it's a landslide that's run into a house and the house is getting buried by mud, I would call that pretty critical, especially if you might have people trapped inside. But if it's just a landslide that's not damaging anything or not crossing over roads, that's something that can probably wait. A down power line that's active, if you see it on the ground sparking, I would call that critical. And a collapsed building, probably critical. Spreading fire, probably critical. People trapped in an elevator, to me, that it could go either way. If they've been able to communicate outside that elevator and nobody's injured and the building's not collapsing, they can probably wait a little while. They won't be happy, but they can wait a little bit while. So a hazardous material release that we sort of talked about that a moment ago, that's something that could be very critical. So resource requests, that could be like somebody calling for some additional personnel just because they feel they're shorthanded. So probably something that could go in the queue and doesn't have to be passed right at that moment. Next slide. Let's again picture that big earthquake in Turkey. Do you think they had emergency communications via cell phone? I doubt it. Radio would work. And for example, if you think back to the big storm they had in Puerto Rico several years ago, they lost all their infrastructure, no cell phones. The only thing that worked was radio. And a lot of the communications was handled by ham radio from the island and also from off the island, because hams on the mainland were able to talk to a few of the hams on the island, and they were able to coordinate emergency communications that way. Okay, how can we communicate? If you look at this table, you see various modes. And if you look under the technology column, the second column, you see the simple method is a runner, meaning somebody actually carries messages from point to point on foot or by vehicle or whatever. The next one down is landline, cell phone, internet. May work, probably not in a major disaster. The last category, two-way radio. And here we have basically three types of radios that we use in CERT. FRS, the family radio service, GMRS, which is General Mobile Radio Service, and then ham. I'm going to spend just a moment and talk about the FRS and the GMRS. FRS, if any of you have played with those, if you own some, you know from experience that your effective range is really not what's advertised on by the manufacturers. And I see Tim smiling there. I've tested FRS here in my neighborhood, Walnut Heights, and I'm lucky to be able to talk for a quarter mile from my house. I consider them toys. Okay, GMRS is the next step up from an FRS and actually uses some of the same frequencies. But unlike FRS, GMRS, you need a license. There's no testing, but it's a $35 fee for a 10-year period, but it covers the entire family. And GMRS, because they're able to use higher power, higher transmit power, we've tested them here in the LaRue area around Walnut Heights, and we're able to talk with just a little handheld radio, which looks like an FRS radio, over 3 or 4 miles. So that's a very viable option. Ham radios are the next step up, requires a basic license. And as I mentioned earlier, CERT will actually help you to get that basic license. But the advantage with ham radio is you can go through a series of what we call repeaters. And it's very similar to what the police department uses, for example. You know, all the officers are walking around with a handheld radio. And obviously they're not able to talk over very large distances, long distances, but they can go through a repeater where the signal goes up to a tower someplace, usually mounted on a hill, and is immediately retransmitted. Well, we have the same type of systems. And here in Walnut Creek, we have a repeater at the intersection of Highway 24 and 680. And if you drive by and look up, you'll see a tower with some antennas on top. One of those antennas, it belongs to Walnut Creek CERT. So with a with a handheld radio and a license, we can talk from one side of Walnut Creek all the way to the other side of Walnut Creek with no problems, as if we were standing right next to each other. So that's one of the most reliable systems that we have for emergency communications. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we just talked about this. The FRS radios, very, very limited. There are no repeaters that can be used on FRS. GMRS does allow repeaters on certain channels, but not every GMRS radio is capable of using those repeaters. And the channels 8 to 14 are what we call the FRS low power channels. Those are the ones where you're lucky to be able to talk more than a block or two apart. So again, when you're looking at radio advertising, ignore all the claims that is on the packaging. You know, you'll see things like 35 miles, et cetera, et cetera. Don't believe it. It's not true. Okay. Next slide. And I just talked about these repeaters, which allows us to cover long distances by relaying the radio signal through unmanned, and that's very important, unmanned radio stations where the station receives the signal and then retransmits it immediately. One of the biggest problems that I've experienced with radio communications is how to properly structure your message. And, you know, especially in the time of an emergency, the tendency for all of us is to get very excited and kind of lose track of what's going on around you and, you know, how you should be talking on the radio. If any of you have, you know, watched these police movies and police programs on TV, and you pay attention to the communications between the dispatcher and the officer out in the field, the thing that you'll notice is everything is very short. There's no long, you know, 100, 200 word paragraphs being stated. It's very, very, very short. And that's what we must do when we talk on the radio. Next slide. So what you have to remember is something that we call the ABCs: accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Okay, think about what you're going to say before you actually say it on the radio. You have to remember that a radio is an open. I mean, it's wide open. A lot of people could be listening to it to a certain frequency, and if you're trying to communicate from the field back to the command post, you want to make sure that the command post knows that it's somebody in their neighborhood trying to contact them. So you have to identify yourself. What we do is we never use individual names. Your first name, for example. Every radio communications uses a tactical call sign. And you got an example of that in the search and rescue portion of this evening. For example, SAR 1, Search and Rescue Team 1. And the command post that you're calling is always another tactical call sign. In my neighborhood, it would be, for example, LaRue command. Okay, and we never call the command post, even if you know that it's John sitting at the radio, you never call for John, because the radio operator could change. It's like picture walking into a department store to make a complaint. You walk in and you ask for the manager. Even if you know the manager's name, you ask for the manager, because maybe the manager that you know is not on duty that day. But if you walk in and ask to see the manager, whoever you're talking to knows who to go get for you. So that's why we always use a tactical call sign. Tactical call signs will be assigned to you when you report to the command post. I mentioned brevity. Here I'm going to ask Gary to unmute. What I'm going to have Gary do, Gary and I are going to give you an example of the proper way to communicate and relay a message, and the wrong way. So you're going to hear Gary call the command post, which will be me, and then he's going to relay some information to me. What I'd like all of you to do, if you have a little piece of paper, jot down the pertinent information that he's relaying to me. Gary, go ahead.
Command post, this is team one.
Team one, this is command post. Go ahead.
We found a house in terrible condition on Onyx Drive. I hear screaming coming from the garage. A tree has landed on the house and electrical sparks are flying all over the place. We're continuing down the street now.
Okay.
Team one,
All right.
clear.
Command post clear. Okay, did everybody catch the important information in that transmission? There was really nothing there, was there? Okay, Gary, do it the right way this time.
Command post, this is team one with an emergency message, over.
Team one, this is command post, go ahead.
Address 4003 Onyx Drive, over.
Team one, spell Onyx, please.
I spell Onyx, Oscar, November, Yankee, X-ray, over.
I copy 4003 Onyx Drive, over.
Severely damaged garage, people trapped inside, over.
I copy severely damaged garage, people trapped inside, over.
Electrical sparks prevent access to the garage, over.
I copy electrical sparks prevent access to the garage, over.
Send rescue team, over.
I copy send rescue team, over.
Team one, clear.
Command post clear and out. Okay. Now, I hope everybody got the difference between those two transmissions from the field. You notice when Gary did it the second time, he broke all the information down into short segments that I was able to copy. And each time he gave me some information, I verified that. And that's one of the habits that you want to get into, because so many times, for example, when he gave me the address 4003, there may have been some interference or background noise somewhere, and I may have copied it as 4005, just because I didn't catch the last digit. So by me repeating it back to him, gave it back to him incorrectly, he would have corrected me on the spot there. So that's just an example of the proper way to communicate. Okay. Now, one of the things that we started using some years back is this windshield survey form. And this does a couple of things for us, actually many things for us. It it has its pros and cons. I want to talk about both. The pros are that it keeps the information organized, because as the command post gets a call, there are certain blocks here that can be filled out so that the information is kept in a very orderly fashion. Okay. The disadvantage is that it takes time. We have to have a scribe. Usually we have a scribe that is not the radio operator, because the radio operator is busy talking on the radio, etc. So we have a scribe listening, jotting all this information down. I know all of you have seen police shows where you hear the dispatcher and the officer in the car or whatever using a phonetic alphabet. Now, speak slowly, clearly, break your messages down into 5-word groups with a pause, because typically somebody is trying to jot all this information down, at least for now. When we get into get everybody onto our new computerized system, it'll be a lot easier. But just remember, accuracy is very important. That's why, when Gary was helping me with an earlier example, when he gave the street name as Onyx, I asked him to spell it to make sure that I had it correct. So next slide. Okay, so here's the military phonetic alphabet, which it's actually very easy to remember. It won't take you long at all. The trickiest part for a lot of people are the numerals. So, for example, the number 9, you'll hear us say niner. And when you hear niner, it becomes very evident that we're talking about the number 9. One of the things that a lot of people lose track of is the decimal point. A lot of people are used to saying dot. For example, .com, when you're talking about a website, dot could also be a decimal point, but decimal is unmistakable when you hear that. You heard Gary and I use go ahead and clear, and I think I ended my end by saying over. And what this means to other people listening, or the people someone that you're talking to, is that you're finished. Okay, go ahead. It's like telling somebody, go ahead, finish talking, start talking. When somebody says over, that means that they are finished talking. Clear means no response needed, and we'll continue to listen. Out is finished talking, leaving the conversation. Very similar, or can be used. Out and over, essentially means the same thing. Okay, this is something that you have to be very aware of. A radio it's an open door. I mean, you don't know who's listening. There is no privacy. It's not like a telephone. And by law, there are certain things that we have to keep private. Anything that's personal identification, birth dates, a person's name, obviously social security numbers, phone numbers, they should never be stated on the air. The last item, their name, age, location, etc., about minors. That's something that you really, really have to be careful of disclosing on the air. So, my advice is review that list, and anytime you're talking on the radio, just remember, if you misuse this information and somebody comes after you, they're going to come after you and win.
What you have on the screen are 2 forms that are used by Walnut Creek CERT. The form on the right is a field team message form. This is a form that is given and used by search and rescue teams once they have been deployed by the command post. So you can see that, let's say you're on a team of 5 or 6 CERTs who've been asked by the command post to go and walk through a neighborhood, identify situations that are of concern or dangerous and that should be reported back for professional first responders to assist with, or to assist the public who may be injured in their neighborhoods. So this form is what they use to document everything that they do. You can see there are line items 1 through 25. The team would, the scribe of the team would document where the team is, how many victims they've encountered, what the particulars of the victims are in terms of their triage, animals that were found, specific hazards that were noted, counts of significantly damaged buildings, logistical supplies that they may need, breaks they may need, etc. And this gets communicated to the command post when there are significant items to report. Otherwise, it is documentation for what the team has taken action on. This, and the team doesn't, when they report this information, they don't report all of these lines. They only report what it is that they need to communicate. So for example, if they are at a particular address and as a team, they need to take a break, or they need to have additional water, or they need some specific support of some kind, they would complete that request down here. And when they called it in, they would identify where they were, and then they'd skip it down and they'd say, item 20, here's what's needed. So that's the field team message form. And you'll spend more time after you become a Walnut Creek CERT, you'll spend more time learning how to use this form. This general message form is used exclusively for Walnut Creek to communicate from the CERT command post to the city's emergency operations center, very dangerous, life-threatening situations. So we don't communicate routinely to the city's emergency operations center what it is that we're doing or what we've encountered. The only time we send a message to the EOC in general is when there are major life-threatening or infrastructure damage conditions. So if there's a major gas leak, if there's a spreading fire, if there's a road blockage, if there is arcing or downed power lines in a major roadway, if there is a break in the water main or any of the major utility breaks, and then of course any life-threatening conditions. So multi-injury, a multi-casualty situation, or a location with multiple red triaged victims, meaning people who are really have life-threatening emergencies. We will communicate that using this form from our neighborhood command post to the city's Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. Now, it's important to remember that in the city of Walnut Creek, the purpose of the Emergency Operations Center is to get help where they can. But remember, in a multi-city disaster, fire, police, ambulance services are going to be severely limited. So while we are going to communicate this information up to the EOC, it doesn't mean we're going to get an immediate response, or that the situation is going to be addressed in an immediate way.
The beautiful thing about ham radios is we have a number of channels or radio frequencies that we can use. right now we have Walnut Creek, we have all the CERT neighborhoods broken down, and they each have a set of frequencies that they can use within that neighborhood. For example, and here in LaRue, we have, say, channel 51, which we can assign for the SAR teams out in the field. We have channel 52, which can be used between the command post and somebody at City Hall, for example. We have another frequency that we can use and assign it to a transport team. And all of these frequencies or these channels would be assigned to the appropriate people at the time they report for emergencies at the command post. The antennas, whenever you're talking on it, or for the most time listening, that antenna should be pointing straight up toward the sky. When you press the button to transmit, there is always a very, very slight delay. So if you press the button and immediately start talking, there's a good chance the first word or the first part of the word that's coming out of your mouth is going to be chopped off. So the key is press the button, hesitate for just a moment, and then start talking to make sure that everything that you want to say is heard on the other end.
I think the only thing we wanted people to know about this is what you and Gary demonstrated, which is what we're talking about is communications primarily within CERT from a search and rescue team to our CERT command post. And so at the CERT command post, there's going to be somebody that operates the way you heard Jerry operate, acting as command and telling Gary is the search team observer, reporter, that he could go ahead. So that's what we're not getting into, Jerry, until April 29th, when people come back, is the concept of the ham radio nets that we perform to keep practice and test our systems on a weekly basis.
We're always using a tactical call sign. So the proper procedure, if you're out in the field, calling into the command post is you, of course, listen to make sure there's no other radio traffic going on. And then you're going to call the command post. In other words, command post, this is SAR1. And then wait for a response. If you don't get a quick response, repeat yourself. Command post, this is SAR1. And when command post replies to you, they're going to reply, SAR1, this is command post, go ahead. Okay, that way you each acknowledge each other to make sure that you're communicating with the proper party, the party that you're trying to connect to. The FCC requires that every 10 minutes at the minimum, you have to announce your actual FCC call sign. For example, my call sign, which you see next to my name here, is N6EVH, November 6 Echo Victor Hotel. Okay, that has to be announced at the minimum every 10 minutes. And when you end the transmission with a particular station, you have to end it with your call sign. One of the main things is it's really difficult to listen and write. And that's why currently at the command post and even out in the field, we have somebody on the radio and then we have somebody taking notes. And speed actually hurts when it comes to communications. So the key is accuracy, which means speak slowly, speak in short sentences. And in order to prevent the microphone on the handheld radio from picking up extraneous sounds, they're designed so that the microphone needs to be right here, about an inch from your mouth. And depending on the radio, probably turn slightly so that you're not talking directly into the mouth, into the microphone, because that creates a rushing wind noise. And, that's why you see on a lot of broadcast microphones, they'll have that foam screen on it, which is called the windscreen. So the key is you're going to hold the radio up close to your mouth, but rotate it slightly so you're talking slightly across the microphone. But if you're holding the radio out here, I can pretty much guarantee you that the other end is not going to hear you, but they will hear a lot of background noise. And the last item I mentioned, hold the antenna vertically. Oh, and very important, right above that line. This is something that a lot of newer operators forget to do. When you're finished talking, immediately let go of that push the talk button. I've seen a lot of new operators continue to hold that button down for a while. And what they're doing is they're broadcasting silence, but they're tying up that channel because nobody else will be able to use it. So, okay. And again, let me repeat that radio channels can be heard by anyone with a scanner. So be careful what you say. If you're participating in a drill, remember to announce periodically that this is a drill, because the last thing we want to do is be talking about a search and rescue or an accident and panicking the general public if they hear all of our radio chatter, not realizing that we're just having a drill. So to help you get comfortable with using the radio, we do have here in Walnut Creek, we have several nets, weekly nets, where you can practice using the radio, check in. There's a roll call, and we have one person acting as a net control. So, we invite you to participate in those nets also.